Is the image visible now?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Mohan, for this. We should have done it yesterday, as you said. Okay, let's go on.
I'll continue. So they moved us towards modernism, which involves a careful look at what is tradition. And thus we have contemporary art to reflect upon and represent who we are. The questioning of what is tradition threatens Hindutva and has been repeatedly threatened by Hindutva. Hussein had to go into exile and die in exile, heartbroken. Art shows have been vandalized, artists feel threatened, and art shows are being self-centered out of fear. This lithograph is now housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum. I love many details here. Colonialism, the wickedly gleaming skeleton, seems delighted to be gently stroking Brahmanism. The eyes of the skeleton say so. The eyes of the skeleton are masterful and wicked, but colonialism has lost its teeth, although its maws are wide. The Brahmin priest is performing rituals guided by palm leaf texts in his hand, sacred turmeric colors that grind people of India into death, swallowed up anonymously in the seas. The priest is, of course, well fed, unlike all those ground down by caste. The most heartbreaking is the image of a starving man holding onto the feet of the Brahmin priest. At the bottom, to the right, is a woman hoping for deliverance. She could well be a male, a Sufi saint. The images are stark, as is the background of scattered stars of hope in a blackness. This image was supposed to be the backdrop of the discussion between Professor Ajantha Subramanian and Mr. T.M. Krishna at the Bangalore International Center on her book on the 25th of April 2020. This discussion was titled Meritocracy and Democracy, the Social Life of Caste in India. This is available on the BIC website, and I would urge all of you to watch and hear this. What strikes me about this discussion was that it was not so much about broader questions of democracy and caste. But not to be missed, here are two born Tamil Brahmins discussing a book about how Brahminical usurping of the idea of merit have implications for India's democracy. Subramanian takes on this question quite brilliantly. But before this discussion took place, Mr. Mohan Pai, one of the founders of Infosys, an educational magnate, sponsor of Op India, a known BJP ideologue who objects to eggs and midday meals for children, took objection to the use of this, what he called anti-Hindu image at the BIC. Since he is also a founder donor and a member of the board of BIC, BIC obliged him and replaced the image with Subramanian's bland book cover. But before BIC could do that, his son, Mr. Pranay Pai, apparently threatened to lodge an FIR alleging insult to Hinduism. This is nepotism in bullying and censorship. And Mr. Pranav Pai followed this up with a host of trolling tweets that he apparently commands an army of trolls. Corporate Brahmanism, wedded to Hindutva, has the power to regulate everything today in India, as in this case, through threats. It is clear that since Hindutva forces have captured all institutions of the state, such as universities, art academies, and even museum, very important to writing a Hindutva history, they are now encroaching on private spaces too. I therefore thought we could begin a discussion with this image. This scary skeleton is, of course, British colonialism, which by marriage to Brahmanism produced a certain India. Colonial history, particularly that of James Mill, and the work of Indologists contributed. 19th century ideas of race were at the heart of this fantasy. Many institutions like the Theosophical Society harbored and refined these ideas of Brahmins as Aryans. Indeed, a pristine Aryan race in India from which Aryans spread to the rest of the world. A glorious Hindu epoch in ancient India was said to have been shattered by barbaric Islam. As is obvious, many of these ideas and institutions fed significantly into Hindutva. Let me begin by confessing I'm an unprincely imposter. I'm a public health worker, but I talk as one who marched repeatedly on the roads of Delhi in support of the Mandal Committee in 1990. In those days, there were massive marches, and we marched again and again. We did not have social media. Our Vice Chancellor then did not initiate disciplinary action against us for taking part in these marches. The Vice Chancellor of JNU today initiates disciplinary action against JNU faculty participating in any sort of protest. This Vice Chancellor, the worst that JNU could have, is from IIT. He has successfully destroyed everything that was good and glorious about JNU, including its egalitarian admission policy that saw JNU have a representative student body even before the implementation of the Mandal Committee report. This unique admission policy has now been dismantled. In the epilogue of the book, Ajantha Subramanian notes that what is happening to students in JNU under the current regime. She forgets to mention that the tool used is an IIT graduate and teacher. If I cannot talk about this book as a born Brahmin, I have other rights to be talking about this book as a reader, like any citizen entitled to my views and to express them, although this cannot be taken for granted in India anymore. The state is throttling all our voices, of course, and we are resisting that the best we can. But there is another censorship going on we need to take note of. Earlier, Dalit voices were censored. In fact, they were not censored. Structural factors made it that Dalits found no voice. When they found voice, they were not heard. It is being suggested by some today that I, being born a Brahmin, should die a Brahmin and not talk about issues related to Dalit struggles. This is because, of course, I lack the experience of being a Dalit. Of course I do, and I am immensely and constantly aware of my privilege. But all humans have something called empathy that makes us humans and heals divisions if we want them to. In the same token, as some Dalit intellectuals frozen into essentialisms would have it, perhaps this book should not be written by a Brahmin. I disagree with this position on several grounds. They said the same too when Anand at Navayana produced Annihilation of Caste with an introduction by Arundhati Roy. I have a few problems with this book, but none of them stemming from either Anand's or Arundhati Roy's caste position. First, Gandhi was a racist. Of course he was, but so was Ambedkar, so was the whole world, or almost all, as Priyambada Gopal's brilliant work Insurgent Empire shows us, those obverse worlds. But racism was normal. What was not normal was Golwalkar's fascist appeal for genocide on the basis of race. Second, my limited reading tells me that Ambedkar was a proponent of the two-nation theory since Muslims were a race apart. Ambedkar too apparently believed in the ideas of race. But at that time, all progressive people believed in ideas of race and eugenics. Sidney and Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw, whose wit I must recall, and indeed the government of the USSR, which initiated public policy based on eugenic ideas. As is well known, the Soviet Union, Sidney and Beatrice Webb's tour there, among other factors, contributed to the Beveridge Committee and thus the National Health Service post the Second World War. Doctors were initially opposed to it, but the Labour government then had such popular support and vision that it came true. Today, it is ironical that doctors in the UK are opposing the relentless privatization of the NHS under both Labour and the Tories. Doctors in India have no such conscience. In short, things are complicated, not a black and white situation. We would like it to be out of laziness, frustration, anger, or an inability to make sense. Not all is Savarna Asavarna. The Nastikas are completely forgotten. Indeed, Amartya Sen assures us that India had more Nastika and Charvaka traditions than the Vedic Brahminical. But the colonial recognition of the Brahminical as representing Hindus wiped out all these other traditions. It also created something called Hindus, a monolithic imagined community that did not exist earlier. This had severe implications. Women in many communities, like the Nairs, the Vokaligas, who inherited land, lost this right once they were classified as Hindus. So did the Devadasis. But how do I understand Dalit opposition to non-Dalits fighting with them? Is it that they have been repeatedly betrayed? But Dalits are repeatedly betraying Dalits. Mayawati is a prime example. Having campaigned for Mr. Modi after 2002, she has remained silent on Hathras. In the meanwhile, Mr. Athawale is busy escorting a minor and one major actress to meet the governor of Maharashtra and the chair of the NCW, who is herself laughable. Hindutva, it is clear, has destroyed all institutions. But back to my own position, we are born into caste, but not into politics. Politics and art create us. In work and politics, we realize ourselves as humans, and our work and art gives expression. I was born into a Brahmin family. I could not help that. But my politics is what I should be judged by. Do I make a better human being of myself? And do I work towards changing this dreadful world we live in? My paternal grandfather, a judge, introduced me to appreciation of all literature, Western music, and we read Abhigyana Shakuntalam together in Sanskrit with a Sanskrit teacher emblazoned with Iyengar Namas, who I remember used to fall asleep during classes. As a result of these classes, I could read Devanagari. So today I can read Hindi, but not understand it at all. And I must confess my dislike for Hindi nationalism. My grandfather wanted me to be a lawyer. He said I should learn all of Shakespeare, the Bible, and the Bhagavad Gita by heart, and that could make I could argue all my cases based on these readings. But that they were wonderful to read in themselves is not something he mentioned, and I don't recall his mentioning the Constitution. My paternal grandmother was short, fair, and blue-eyed, and was an activist at the Family Planning Association of India. My maternal grandmother was blue-eyed too. Aryans. This is so idiotic an idea, but the blue-eyed Chittapavan Brahmins who commanded the RSS believed strongly in it. But just do some field work in Mandya district, you will find huge proportions of Vokkaligas classified as Shudras but claiming to be Aryans are light-eyed. What about Kodagas? They too claim to be Aryans while their language has been identified as distinctly Dravidian. Ditto the Bunts, most famously Aishwarya Rai, the most vapid woman in the world. Ideas of race are so dated, bizarre, and unscientific. It is a project born of hate for the other. But this is at the heart of the RSS project of converting India into a Hindu Rashtra. I do not need to repeat Golwalkar's ideas of Hindutva, nor his appreciation of the Nazi project of the purification of the German race that we in Hindustan could learn from. My grandparents were not landed Brahmins, but Brahmins nevertheless who climbed social ladders into modernizing professions, becoming middle class. Initially, they were all lawyers who supported the national movement and the Congress. Education was important, so was caste endogamy. They arranged marriages for their children. All sons were meant to be engineers, and daughters married to Brahmin engineers. But they were politically engaged, reluctant nationalists, unlike my parents' generation. In my parents' generation, they only met their families socially, all Brahmins. I do not think my parents had one non-Brahmin friend. Actually, they had no friends, only family. All marriages were arranged, with some exceptions, mine among them. They were not involved in political issues at all, or so they claimed. My brother-in-law is an IIT alumnus, a wonderful one. All my nieces and nephews in the USA engineers have had arranged marriages. Although not from IIT, these are people sadly considered the best minds from India. They're all into software. They claim they are apolitical, but I suspect they're in the ranks of Hindutva. They would all claim castelessness and merit and argue that it was reservations that forced them to leave the country since India did not respect merit. To read Ajantha Subramanian's astonishing work is almost to read the history of my family and many Brahmin families like mine over time in South India. What I shall do today is to talk about some aspects of this work with forays into the field of public health. It is a truism that South India as a whole is very categorically different from the rest of India. Tamil Nadu and Kerala had some historic anti-caste and anti-Brahmin movements. Karnataka did not. And yet reservations, a major demand of the non-Brahmin movements in these other states, found resonance in Mysore. Despite the advice of the Diwan, a Brahmin, Mysore introduced reservations in 1918. So to me, it was truly shocking to see the ghastly image ghastly violence in Delhi around the Mandal Committee report. I remember the image of doctors at AIMS sweeping streets, polishing shoes. Also, India Today's channel egging on this violence. Madhu Trehan, I felt, egged on the attempted suicide by immolation of the anti-reservation icon, Mr. Goswami. This was, of course, because we had another distasteful Mr. Goswami. Students from a political IIT Delhi forged a human chain against reservations that I saw. This was impressively huge, stretching more than 2.5 kilometers from Aurobindo Ashram to JNU. I heard that students in IIT, the so-called reserve students, were cowering in fear, unable to mobilize enough numbers to counter Brahmin supremacism that was now out visible. There were many marches I attended in Delhi for reservations. My son Rishabh, then 6 years old, wept and said, "Let us go back to Bangalore," when he saw burning vehicles lit by anti-reservationists that prevented our going back to our flat in Vasant Kunj. It was very, very scary. It was terrifying. The RSS and her family of affiliates were behind all this violence, I was certain. Watching with disbelief this appalling violence, a caste war unleashed by the upper castes, I never felt more South Indian. It was not just the political formations right political formations that were against reservations. So were many academics and thinkers. It is even difficult to remember and list all of them. Andre Bette, Yogendra Singh, Veena Das, my friend Dipankar Gupta, the who's who of Indian sociology. They were not Hindutvavadis, far from it, but were liberals who never examined the structural roots of their own liberalness. It was only EPW, that unique and miraculous journal, that carried some essays in support of the Mandal Committee. Ajantha Subramanian's work of historical anthropology is methodologically impeccable, utterly fascinating, and a great pleasure to read. Her extensive primary sources comprise in-depth interviews with all cohorts from the very first decade of IIT Chennai. She uses a vast array of secondary sources, including the records of IIT, books written by alumni. Jairam Ramesh, we are told, advised alumnus and journalist Sandeepan De, author of the book IITians, the story of a remarkable Indian institution and how its alumni are reshaping the world, to call his book Midnight's Brahmins, because that's what IITians are, the new Brahmins who would not be reading scriptures, but would be technocrats. Subramanian also re-examines the archives because new perspectives bring new life. In addition to the archives, she goes through the extensive anonymous posts on social media of IIT alumni on the issue of reservations and merit. The lens she uses is acutely critical of received Brahminical wisdom in the archives, and while doing so, she articulates a vision beyond the essentialist, whether Brahmin or non-Brahmin, a category that does not exist in the records quite extensively that she's looked at education in Madras Presidency, later Tamil Nadu. Her work is compelling, and an excellent review article by Namit Arora was published in The Caravan. This was called Caste and the Delusion of Merit in Indian Higher Education, 1st August 2020. I shall therefore not go into many of the arguments made in this review essay or cover the book in its entirety. What I shall do is pick and choose a few themes to attempt to bring out the richness of this extraordinary work. Subramanian points out early in her book that all the engineering marvels of India in the pre-modern period, the temples, the mosques, the forts, the mausoleums, the irrigation channels, and so on, were the work of skilled Shudras. Brahmins disdained manual labor, and this is in fact repeatedly invoked by colonial officials when the colonial government reluctantly introduced professional engineering education in India. In chapter 1, entitled The Colonial Career of Technical Knowledge, she traces how engineering, from being an occupation of the Shudras, became transformed by colonialism and the changes in land relations and therefore caste that it brought about. The early engineering colleges were also sites of Brahmin monopoly over education, always with tension between the conceptual and the practical, the laboratory. So while Brahmins took over engineering colleges, the non-Brahmins with their technical skills were relegated to vocational colleges where mathematics, considered a Brahminical subject, was not taught. We see a Brahmin monopoly in medical education also when the first medical college was set up in Calcutta in 1832, was overrun by Brahmins despite what would have been the pollution of dissection. When the IIT Madras was set up, the regional engineering colleges had already introduced reservations, diluting the Brahmin monopoly over engineering. This monopoly was facilitated not just by Brahmin monopoly of education, but also, as Subramanian points out, because it promised capital accumulation. This was met with the first legal challenge in the High Court of Madras that I shall come to later. The introduction of reservations for the OBCs in professional colleges in Tamil Nadu meant a more diverse student body. I personally think this is one reason why Tamil Nadu does not find it difficult to staff its primary health centers with doctors, even in remote and tribal areas. The fact that students from non-Brahmin background from these areas are recruited into medical education means that they are more willing to work here than the upper caste from urban background. It is no surprise that we now find the government of Tamil Nadu challenging the NEET selection process in the Supreme Court, as it would lower the proportion of candidates in the reserved category. Subramanian's book's sterling contribution is to trace the intellectual journey or the invention of merit, much like the invention of tradition, both of which occur simultaneously, shaped by colonialism and Brahminism. She traces its origins back to the need to embourgeoisie, or whatever. I'm sorry, I don't pronounce it properly. If you will, colonial bureaucracy after the 1857 uprising. The East India Company's bureaucracy comprised the appointment of the landed gentry and the lesser aristocracy through contacts and nepotism. It was now felt that the meritocratic middle classes should be selected by an examination. What it did do was to provide employment opportunities for those educated first at Eton and later at Oxford and Cambridge. We see this later when women doctors and nurses find employment in India. The written examination weeded out people without a university education and from a wider class background. But when crammers came up to prepare people from a more diverse class background to crack this exam, the British Crown reacted with increasing the age at entry, again to restore the dominance of Oxbridge candidates. Subramanian points out that through all these years, only one person from a working class background made it to the civil service. She provides the relevant data. This is something I truly admire in her work. She provides data. All her arguments are backed by data. When demands arose in India to recruit colonial subjects, Viceroy Ripon saw this, I quote, as a bulwark against Indian nationalism, and the ICS exam was conducted in India from 1922 onwards. It is not surprising that the Indian recruits were all from urban upper caste backgrounds. We see, therefore, that the ICS exam, and I'm quoting Subramanian, was not an acultural objective tool of testing. As she argues, I quote, it was a class character of the modern examination that contributes to its popular perception as a linchpin of meritocracy, close quotes. The ICS exam then serves as a model for the post-independence establishment of the Union Public Service Commission, UPSC exam, that of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and later the IIT Joint Entrance Exam, all of which were meant to weed out the non-meritocratic. Subramanian gives us data on the number of students attempting the IIT JEE exam every year, JEE exam each year. These are shocking indicators of what is wrong with higher education in India. They thwart the growth of inquiring minds, privileging mugging to learning, reifying the technical at the cost of the imaginative and the social. The idea that some people are better suited to learning than others is, of course, naturalized in the caste system. The initial cohorts of students in IIT Madras were largely Tamil Brahmins whose parents were in central government service. She has a telling story of two young men, roommates in the hostel. I first read this story in an earlier publication in Current Anthropology, which stayed in my mind. Noticing that his roommate is not wearing a punal, the Brahmin sacred thread, this young man concludes that his roommate must have very progressive parents indeed. It never occurs to him that his roommate might not be a Brahmin, especially since this was a student in the unreserved category. Without exception or irony, the alumni refer to their innate intelligence that enabled them to clear the JEE. The rank they obtained in JEE is like another caste mark on their foreheads. This, of course, sets them apart from the reserved candidates when they do manage to get in. These are also set apart by the non-Brahmin Tamil they speak, and that their command over English is not as good as that of the non-reserved. But as Subramanian points out, these have reserved for themselves a century and more of cultural and social capital, now masquerading as merit. The spurious idea of innate intelligence also informed that infamous debate on race and intelligence in the US, the so-called bell curve debate. What you saw there was, of course, white supremacy masquerading as innate intelligence. Indeed, that the IQ test itself was not an objective tool, but congealed with racism. Yet psychologists found it difficult to accept this for many years, just as IIT alumni continue to cling on to the spurious idea that the JEE tests objectively test for innate intelligence. As she notes, I quote, "They obscure the ways in which the JEE, as a test of excellence, builds on and extends histories of unequal caste capital," end quote. By invoking caste, the Bahujans and Dalits are set to play identity politics, while invoking merit, the upper caste somehow mysteriously do not. Subramanian then traces the growth of the coaching industry, estimated by the Associated Chamber of Commerce and Industry to be worth US $2 billion in 2008. We are told, I quote, 160,000 teenagers attend quotas coaching institutes every year, paying between 50,000 and 100,000 rupees as annual tuition. They are taught by IIT alumni who claim salaries of 15 million rupees to 20 million rupees, presumably per year. What the coaching industry did was to demystify the examination by teaching skills that would enable one to crack the exam. This was then nothing about innate intelligence. It could be learned. What it also did was to provide an opportunity for those castes without social or educational capital, first generation educated, to join the IITs. These were groups who had moved up the class ladder through the Green Revolution, mostly OBCs. The initial cohorts of IITians were drawn to employment in the public sector enterprises in India, but by the mid-1980s, they were increasingly drawn towards Indian institutes of management and then private sector employment. At the same time, started the migration to the USA, where they were to build brand India, initially in academia and later in the Silicon Valley. This trajectory too is carefully traced, noting how many in this lot were now drawn to Hindutva. This last story is not adequately fleshed out, but no author can do everything. I will not trace this narrative any further, but turn to another insight, another sleight of hand that Subramanian does flesh out. Like the myth of merit, this is the myth of the castelessness of the upper castes. In 1951, two Tamil Brahmins, Champakam Dorairajan and R. Srinivasan, challenged the Madras government's order reserving seats in the engineering colleges in the Madras High Court. The High Court struck down reservations, arguing that they violated the fundamental right of citizenship guaranteed in the Constitution. This judgment read, I quote, "It would be strange if, in this land of equality and liberty, a class of citizens should be constrained to wear the badge of inferiority because, forsooth, they have a greater aptitude for certain types of education than other classes. These students, I quote, belong to a certain community or caste by reason of their caste discipline, habit, and modes of life," end of quote. This laid the ground for the widespread assumption that upper caste rights were consistent with democratic rights and principles, while lower caste rights violated democratic principles. The Supreme Court upheld the Madras High Court judgment in April 1951. In June 1951, led by Nehru and Ambedkar, the first amendment to Article 15 of the Constitution was passed in Parliament, which enabled state governments to make special provisions for the advancement of socially and educationally backward groups. Subramanian notes how Satish Deshpande points out that the story of how upper castes transformed their caste capital into modern capital is, quote, not well known because it runs with the grain of dominant common sense, end quote. In this scheme of things, upper castes are naturalized as, I quote, the legitimate inheritors of modernity, end of quote, while lower castes are hyper-visible as the illegitimate purveyors of pre-modern castes. The IITs, with the visibility of their alumni, cast, I quote, the lower caste subject whose eligibility for reservation defined them in terms of collective histories of disadvantage, while the upper caste subject was classified as an individual citizen defined by merit, end of quote. What was, of course, elided here was the inheritances that undergirded achievement, accumulated caste capital. In other words, that caste privilege and inheritance is constantly, I quote, misrecognized as middle-class labor and racial talent, end of quote. This is helped by the rise of entrepreneurship in the US with its ideologies of self-made success. The Ayn Randish figure, entirely self-made and successful and very male. I quote, entrepreneurialism, and that too being non-white entrepreneurial successes in a new industry, deepen their investment in a narrative of humble middle-class origin in which the brain is elevated as the sole form of capital and histories of caste are strikingly absent, end of quotes. The vast majority of alumni recognized class as a form of collectivity, that they were from the middle classes, but had contempt for caste and what they labeled as casteism. They would not accept the idea that caste perhaps marked their own inheritances and achievements, which was defined as merit. The JEE was one indicator of this casteless merit. But a pause, not so much a quarrel as a pause, a need to understand, my need to understand. Subramanian argues that caste was reconfigured into race during colonialism. And she gives a number of reasons why this happened and why she thinks this has happened. In the light of the huge amount of discussion around Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, Sunil Khilnani, Arjun Appadare, and others have pointed out that Wilkerson is equating apples and oranges while confounding caste and race. People familiar with the philosophy of method in social sciences would argue that analogy and inference of causation are not methodologically valid. I found Wilkerson's book fascinating, rich with facts, the personal and the political. It reminded me of another powerful book doing the rounds, Elise Weinbaum's The Afterlife of Reproductive Slavery, who argues that contemporary patterns of racism are shaped by what she calls the slave episteme, the afterlife of reproductive slavery. Structural factors of race have imprinted people beyond their own recognition, as has caste. And yet there must be deliverance, for otherwise we are all convicted at birth. While casteism and racism are similar, caste is not race. Caste is religiously sanctioned and is at the heart of Vedic Brahmanism, while race is not imprinted in the Bible. So my question is, what analytic purchase does Subramanian make when, like Wilkerson, she argues that caste was converted to race under colonialism? Race was always fixed, or was it? While caste might have been more uncertain, more protean, as Subramanian shows us. But why might we not have new caste censuses? By being blind to the mundane reality of caste, we do not serve justice. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mohan, for your rich reading of the book. Maybe if we have time, we can discuss this whole thing about caste and race a little more later. I have some other insights on it. maybe either in this meeting or later. But for now, let's just go ahead and continue with Dr. Murali Krishna Malipathu's presentation. And Murali, on to you. 20 plus 10 minutes, as you like.
Okay. I may not take that much, but let's see. Can you hear me, Srivatsan?
Yes, you are audible, Murali.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks. Yes. I would like to thank Professor Mohan Rao for actually outlining and also delving on the various strands of the kind of argument built in the richly qualitative accounts of IIT students' experiences and their claim to merit. So in a way, he has actually summarized the entire book. But what I'll do is that I'll try and raise a few questions while at the same time trying to open the debate from some of the important chapters. So I am actually trying to focus on last three chapters, that is testing merit, contesting reservation, and brand IITs. So these would be the basis for my further engagement with the book, and also the questions that I may raise eventually. At the outset, I would also, it would be unfair if I don't thank Anveshi for extending this invitation to come and discuss this on this platform. And I must say that I'm speaking on the Anveshi platform for the very first time. But nonetheless, they have been very good friends of me from last, I think, 2 decades. So thank you, Srivatsan and Sunita, for inviting me. And now what I'll do is that I'll just directly get into the chapter on testing merit, while at the same time just trying to give a colonial history as a background to what actually what were the practices or the methodologies devised in order to test merit. So now from 1847 onwards, we have the colonial accounts of thinking about or reforming selection criteria for the UPSC and as well as not UPSC, sorry, that is ICS, Indian Civil Services of the colonial kind, and then the engineering services that they had initiated in the 19th century. So the methodology that they had adopted for testing merit and choosing people from the larger pool of talented for the Indian civil services was, of course, the British individuals, but British individuals aligned with a particular sense of meritocracy and the competitiveness from England. So the Oxbridge model, what they call Oxbridge model, aligning the ICS test or a competitive exam to the Oxbridge model is basically to incorporate the aspects of Oxbridge graduate program curriculum into the competitive examination tool that was used. So the colonial emphasis was that the Indian civil servants must be cultured and then should have the capabilities to kind of exercise their discrimination of intellect in order to discriminate between or distinguish between the good and bad, while being very aware of the earlier practices of corruption by the East India Company administrators. So therefore, their aptitude or reference to the capable individuals and then aligning that with Oxbridge graduates was something very conscious in their decision. So that is one thing that as an historical antecedent to the testing tool that they have created. And then, but soon there were coaching centers around in UK, which were actually training people for Indian civil services. So then they had gone for 2 rounds of reform, and then kind of aligned it with honors course in Oxbridge, which ensured that more than 70% of the ICAS recruits were from Oxbridge. So this as kind of a background to how the careful selection of certain kind of candidature was prioritized over conducting a test in the sea of individuals who can compete must be understood. So the candidature is very important, and there are certain considerations behind candidature which actually allowed the recruitment board to closely link the competitive exam to Oxbridge. Now that as a historical example for introduction of the competitive exams is actually drawn further and then adopted, if I may say so, in the context of the post-independent India's formulation of competitive exams and construction of the tools for testing the excellence of the individuals who are the right candidature for the higher learning. Okay? So that way, the emphasis on the concept that we find in this JEE is actually something that is borrowed from the colonial history. And this conceptual being foregrounded as the key parameter for identifying candidature is now attached in the post-independent context to CBSE. Now the CBSE board, as opposed to the state board, emphasizes on conceptual understanding, whereas the state board, as it is elaborately discussed in the book, it promotes rote learning. So rote learning as kind of a detriment for distillation of the intellectual prowess or exceptional caliber was to be understood in this context. So therefore, prioritizing of CBSE candidates for JEE as the suitable candidature. Now, it is in that context that the whole range of discussion that happens about the gifted versus the coached. Now, it's very important for us to understand what the gifted entails as opposed to the coached, because in the 2000s, the coaching industry per se has grown both in Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh, which was seen as a threat to the gifted innate excellence of the Brahmins and the upper castes of the Madras and India in general. So the giftedness is actually again defined as a cultural category in the sense that those who are historically privileged have a culture of being educated and being rigorous in terms of their mastery of the concepts, and then proven track record of knowledge. And therefore, knowledge as a value kind of is ubiquitous in the culture and upbringing. So therefore, the giftedness is actually drawn from the idea of the history of the cultural progress that the Brahmins and the upper castes have made from the colonial period to the post-independence time. So therefore, the giftedness, what is underlying to the giftedness, as Ajantha Subramanian tries to argue, is that history of the privilege, which seems to be entirely missing from the consciousness or the common sense that is developed around the idea of a merit. So therefore, she tries to say that there is, to the idea of a merit which is kind of expressed through giftedness of the Brahmins and the upper caste, who have kind of aptitude for the exceptional knowledge and intellectual caliber, is something that is a product of history. So therefore, she makes that point very powerfully. But these candidates, that is the IIT graduates, did not agree to the concept that the giftedness is actually a product of history, but it is a dint of their own effort and individual effort. So therefore, this liberal individual idea or the notion of a merit as somebody who is hardworking, as despite circumstantial odds, and also somebody who has really dedicating one's life for acquiring merit. Therefore, one's success therefore needs to be seen in this hard work and dedication and their commitment for individual excellence, rather than see that as a product of history. That comes out in many ways from the interviews that were conducted, and then they also have a sense of legitimate claim to IITs, because they think that IITs are the kind of islands of exceptional meritocracy, and in these islands of meritocracy, only the exceptionally good candidates must be selected, and that is perfectly done, undoubtedly, by the rigorous selection process that is underlying the JEE. And therefore, the proven track record of the All India rank in the JEE itself is taken as a parameter of their merit and excellence, and nothing else need to be proven from their part to say that they are meritorious. So this is very important, and it's also very important to know and understand that why JEE, which is merely entrance exam, stands for merit. Because their claim is that it is not IITs that make Brahmins and upper caste meritorious, but it is actually the candidates or the students that make the IITs the islands of excellence. So we would assume that students who come to the institutions of excellence, get groomed and cultivated with the exceptional, knowledge sharing and then the rigorous process of academic culture that are embedded into the universities and IITs that would shape the intellect and the individuality and the academic integrity of the individual. But it's the reverse of it. What is claimed here? It is the students who actually make IITs meritorious. It is not the other way around. Now, this is very interesting, and the confidence with which this argument comes out is actually intriguing, in the sense that they, the upper caste candidates who had, and the Brahmins included in that, and rather leading that category, are coming from, again, a history of Indian bureaucracy, whether it is engineering services of the colonial period, or it is the UPSC of the post-colonial kind. So these are the products or the inheritors or descendants of that kind of a lineage. And with that kind of a background, I think they also get this confidence that it is, if not them, who are meritorious, both in terms of the social caliber and the cultural history, who else can be meritorious? And therefore, IITs are just mere institutions which administer the growth of the merit in the Brahmins and upper caste in the processes that are conducted. That's all. But the institutions don't contribute to merit in significant way. It's not that they are denying they don't contribute, but it's not contributed in a significant way to them, but rather they are contributing to it. So that is, now this confidence actually, I mean, if one has to raise questions, one has to really understand that this confidence is actually not merely a product of academic history or educational history, but it is also a confidence of the Brahmin subjectivity and upper caste subjectivity as the socially dominant and then ritually superior, as well as people who had enormous access to the resources. So therefore, all of this put together actually embodies the confidence of the Brahminical subject here. Now, one way in which that gets actually challenged is by the entry of the coached, the so-called coached from the coaching industry. And but very soon this unmarked meritorious subject tries to deny that privilege to the coached who are coming from the regional medium background, who have gone through 2 years of rigorous long-term coaching to prepare for the entrance exam, which is JEE. And therefore, they say that they are not conceptually sound, but rather they are, they have acquired that ability through practice, okay? Practicing the questions and answers, which is again an extension of the rote learning. So therefore, that contestation of the general category seats by the coached is also once again denied in the name of non-meritorious, trying to claim it as just by the mere capital, economic capital that they have acquired, and with that they are able to spend money and then pass, acquire those tools and the skills in order to pass the JEE. That's all. So therefore, they are not innately intelligent. Okay, it is kind of nurtured and a trained kind of intelligence, and which does not take them beyond JEE. So that is the point. Now, again, this is distinguished from the Chennai-based boutique centers, which are again for the meritorious, but the lower middle class meritorious candidates, which are kind of nourished by the IIT alumni, and the Srinivas Ramanujan's Super 30 as a kind of what do you call a reference and a reflection of the lower middle class Brahmins who had merit, and therefore they needed to be uplifted. Therefore, IIT alumni Brahmins tend to train them for it, and both in terms of preparing for the CBSE exams as well as UPSC and GE. So that kind of a multi-pronged approach to their social mobility. Now, there are a few kind of snippets of experiential accounts of the Telugu non-Brahmin students who are getting into JEE, and their mental psychological stress and trauma that they undergo through the coaching, that's also highlighted. But what is now at the end of this particular chapter unit, my question is, when we are talking about, of course, I in a way concur with Ajantha Subramanian's question about how the denigration of the merit by the non-Brahmin and non-upper caste is something to be looked at critically, and their own privileged position to deny the others the right to merit is something that has to be understood in the histories of their privilege, and they in a way monopolizing all kinds of the governmental resources, and then also how do I put it, sanitizing the engineering services in the colonial period, which were actually a blend of both theory and practice, and then eventually evolving engineering sciences as just theoretical sciences, and then totally divorcing from the practice. So in that kind of a sense, in that kind of a history, what we can see is that a denial of access to the social mobility to the non-Brahmin castes, and which is a continuation, which is an argument which is continued in denial of the social mobility to the state category students, economically moving with economic capital, but lacking in social as well as cultural capital. So therefore, this kind of a monopoly of merit here is very, in a way, a resonance a reflection of the historical monopoly that has happened. But what is important for us to that to note that there is some sort of a diversification that has happened with coaching that has come in, and then the state board students being pressed into merit or to perform and showcase their excellence in the JEE. So therefore, that has actually diversified the JEE demographics in terms of who gets to study there. But so therefore, that is where they found it as a threat. But in a way, being acutely aware of the consequences of the coaching that on the students, at the same time, one may also have to acknowledge that perhaps apart from this methodology to contest the merit of the upper caste, India could not produce any other means and methodology or a process to contest the monopoly of the Brahmins. And therefore, this coaching institutions, in trying to diversify the campus, IIT campuses, is one way to challenge the meritocracy. Then another important question is that the whole reservation is actually a non-issue, because for them, coached may be recognized with a bit of a grudging recognition of the coached, but they cannot recognize the presence of the SCs and STs in the campuses because they actually nowhere near to the merit. So diversity is actually not happening from the SC/ST reservation, but it is actually happening from the coaching. And then later, addition of the OBC reservation of 2006, and then the OBC reservation actually really challenged the upper caste merit in us, but again, they have continued to wage the same argument to say that upper caste merit cannot be challenged by OBCs because these are quota students. So there is this conceptualization that is happening around the consolidation of the upper caste categories versus the reserved categories. So as opposed to the ritualistic social hierarchy of the caste, what is happening is in the JEE context, in the IIT higher education context, a consolidation of the non-reserved as upper caste identity, and then the upper casteness as is being entitled and having a claim to merit, and then they being the cohesive category is actually emerging, and then relegating all the quota category students as one and non-meritorious, and therefore they are actually a threat to equality and the democracy, because they are not really using the means of the democracy and the equality principle, but rather they are coming from the quota, which is actually a violation of equality principle in the liberal democracy. So there are three important court cases that are cited, which are actually outlined by Professor Mohan Rao. So I won't go into that. But what is very important to understand in this is that the whole issue of the upper casteness and the lower casteness need to be understood critically, because is there something called, can there be something called upper casteness, which can mirror the society? If you look at the various studies that are, of course, here the Satish Deshpande study is cited by the author to understand the general category versus the reserved category by referring to a lot of discussion that happened in the social media, and then kind of rebuke and dismissal of the quota category students' merit or right to enter into the institutions of excellence, all of that. But my question here is that apart from the underlying, principles of diversity and the representation that are there in the Constitution in Article 15, the clauses from 2 to 5. Apart from the diversity principle, isn't there a need for looking at reservation from the point of view of representation? Because the demographic representation is actually at work in this paradigm, of reservation. But the relegation of that in terms of quota category students is actually a serious threat to the Indian constitutional aspiration for bringing in diversity and representation in order to achieve equality. So the measures of equity, which is reservation, and are actually challenged by the use of arguments of merit. And what is totally at loss is the question of the representation. And it is actually the representation that has to be understood as the right for demographic representation in the institutions and employment, institutions of education, employment, and in the political representations. Therefore, the representation and reservation need to be understood together rather than a reservation as a threat to equality or a kind of a liberal understanding of equality. Then finally, I would say that the branding of IITs actually does the trick. So what they could not do in stopping reservation, implementation of reservation, both 1973 SC reservation and 2006 OBC reservation in admissions, they achieve it with the branding of IIT. So this consolidation of upper casteness that is happening in the IITs is taken forward in enhancing and the economic capital or to acquire or to monopolize the economic capital around the brand IIT. And this entrepreneur kind of a turn to engineering sciences is a kind of a careful, socially engineered process wherein they totally dropped the reserved and the coached and consolidated a upper caste privileged alumni and the passouts of IITs, and then created a brand value for the IIT so that they become the beneficiary of those brand value. And instead of delving into the research and the other advanced academic pursuits after the BTech, they actually delve into the marketization of their knowledge and their skill that they have acquired. And therefore, the entire monopoly of the market that is happening around the upper caste IITians, and then which led to the construction of the Silicon Valley and their contribution to the American economy and American capitalism, is actually nothing but kind of a claim to a global meritocracy, and then built on the social history or the history of the social benefits that they have gained in the colonial India as well as the post-colonial India, and then a subsidized education that they have gained from the higher institutions of excellence. And all of this actually been used to bring in certain important critical aspects of capitalism into the market economy around the branding of IITs, which enabled only the upper caste but totally ignored the lower caste aspirations for social mobility as well as economic mobility. So there, I think they have achieved, the IITians, upper caste IITians led by Brahmins, have achieved in preventing or controlling the socio-economic mobility of both the reserved and the coached. So in that sense, the way in which they have tried to navigate in the diaspora for creating a very comfortable social life, while at the same time navigating the space of racialism, racial discrimination in US, they've also, in a way, closed the doors for the reserved and only allow the non-reserved to enter into the US diaspora and contribute to the the building of Silicon Valley and the entire capitalist economy around that. So with the lot that happens, how they have done in terms of the social dynamics that work in trying to monopolize the market in US, that is dealt in great detail. But unfortunately, the whole idea of Indian Constitution's emphasis on equality and diversity and representation is totally compromised when it comes to the oneness of the IITian brand, because this IITian brand is actually built on the exclusions, and therefore this point has to be driven into the global market. That it is not that everybody who is pass out from IITs is actually reaping the benefits of the brand value of IIT, but it's only the carefully crafted individuals and the communities which were the historical beneficiaries. They are continuing to benefit from the neoliberal capitalist marketization that is happening over the brand value of IITs. So with that, I would kind of conclude by saying that the questions that have emerged from the Ambedkarite ideology, Periyarist ideology, and then the contemporary issues related to the politics and the social theories of justice, they are totally kind of undermined and prevented to come into surface for discussion in IITs, which would otherwise expose the politics of meritocracy as nothing but a Brahminical hegemony, and therefore the contestation and then condemnation of the discussions of caste around the politics and the social justice are totally prevented with full support of the state machinery, because now the state is looking towards US and the IIT alumni and to the Silicon Valley, and therefore they in a way are dictating terms to the Indian state, because there is a section of interest of both elevating the Brahmins and upper caste and then devaluing the lower caste in their aspirations to equality. Yeah, so that is where that I would stop, and then if there are questions, then we can take further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murali, for a very detailed and careful analysis of what the book is saying. While we wait for questions, can I take the privilege as chair and make a few comments? Well, I won't say wait for you to say yes, I'll just go ahead and do it. Firstly, on the whole question of race and caste, both the assertion that race and caste are either identical or come from a common origin, or the assertion that they have no relation to each other, does not respect the history of these institutions. If you look in the 19th century discourse, colonial discourse on caste, I have seen 4 different strands. One of them is caste is based on the laws of Manu, which is that by the Reverend Shering. Another of them is on occupational basis, which is by Nesfield. The third is that they are actually competing communities for political process, which is Ibbotson. And then you have Herbert Hope Risley, who then comes over and actually counterposes all these positions and says that caste has to be understood in terms of race. Because, mind you, colonial rule is predicated on the notion of the master race. There is no question of racism at that time. It was a race. Everybody thought in terms of race. So, from the point of view of a racial hierarchy, caste was included within that hierarchy in the in the colonial British discourse, and that has actually continued to. It has actually dominated all the other forms of thinking about caste and changed the way in which it's thought about it, because it suited the notion of the master race. And what happens with even the Indian anthropologists and statisticians like Mahalanobis and B.S. Guha and various other people is that they begin to use the same hierarchy of thinking about caste in the form of an idea of racial development, looking at anthropometry and changes in the form of the structure of the bones etc., etc. And then trying to relate these to the fact that the upper caste, and especially the Brahmin caste, form a homogeneous group across the subcontinent, whereas the Dalit and the Adivasis, who are called the untouchables and the tribes at that time, they actually form dispersed groups, and therefore they don't have the ability to hang together. All this is against the British assertion, political assertion, that Indians do not know how to form a nation. So even anthropology is in the service of politics in trying to say that actually castes are hanging together. That is one point I want to make. There's a discursive link which is quite complicated, and you can't reduce it to either caste and race identity or caste and race completely different oranges and apples. It doesn't work like that. They are interbraided in discourse and in the way in which they work in power. It's astonishing that these issues have not been looked at so carefully enough. The second point I want to make is Murali raised the whole point about neoliberalism. Now, why does the term merit appeal to the liberals is a question one must ask. And one of the difficulties with Ajantha Subramanian's book is, being an anthropologist, when she does history, she is so interested in the detail of the history that she is not looking at the ways in which things hang together. Why does a thing hang together in a particular way? So if you ask the question, why is merit, which is so important, firstly, why is it important in the West, and how does the Indian Brahminical notion of merit latch onto it? The point is that the meritocracy is something which comes against an aristocracy. Rather than, it comes with the French Revolution, the idea that rather than being entitled to a position to be a doctor or an engineer, whatever it is, you have to have some kind of merit through some kind of performance, not necessarily an exam, not necessarily theoretical, but that you have to have some kind of merit in order to perform. And that meritocracy is the basis of capitalism. Now, the point is that that notion of merit is blind to the fact that you can be meritorious and be non-white in the West. And in India, the Brahminical notion of merit transforms everything into a notion of merit which is based on books and doing well in the exam, and thus actually latches on to the historical succor that merit provides to the absence of aristocracy, were actually reversing it and using it to preserve an aristocracy which comes through caste. So unless we understand the way that actually hangs together the kind of mechanism, it will be very difficult to understand why merit is, it has a solid place, and that is what should be battled. This is what I've got to say. If anybody wants to respond to that or to Mohan's or Murali's work, we can go ahead. I'm looking for some questions here.
Stunned silence.
No, we can wait. There's no hurry. We can slowly. It'll pick up. You don't need to get. It will pick up.
Srivatsan, maybe I can ask for a clarification.
Sure, please.
Yeah, since I have not read the book, maybe I just want to ask Murali if the book provides any data on what is the percentage of people who get into the IITs, like in terms of OBCs and upper caste, because my sense is that since the upper caste people have the required money for the coaching centers, probably the majority or the upper caste probably maybe from small towns, etc., also are able to get into the IITs, but not so much the OBCs or Dalits. So I just wanted to know about that.
Yeah, Manohar, see this percentage in terms of demographic representation is what is assigned by the government. 27% for OBCs and then the 22.5% for SC/ST PCs.
You have to speak a little louder, Murali.
Acha. Okay. Now, what I'm saying is that the percentages of the reservation quota that is assigned by the government of India is applicable, and therefore the 49.5%, whatever, that is what is the target in IITs. But what doesn't come out very well in Ajantha Subramanian's work is that her own interviews with OBCs and Dalits are very few. Okay, so so it doesn't. Apart from saying that if 1 million people write the test, only 3% get selected, or less than 3% of that get selected, it doesn't give us the demographics in terms of how many SCs, how many OBCs, and how many STs, and how many general category students have been admitted into year by year. So that kind of a statistical data, either of a decade or institution based, that is IIT Madras, IIT Bombay. That kind of statistics we don't get from the book. It would have been nice if there was some table that was given somewhere in the book to illuminate that aspect of it. But it is not difficult to decipher and discern from the qualitative details that are presented, and then also the very few Dalits that are interviewed by her, and one Muslim that was interviewed by her, and absolutely no ST in her interviews. And then women are also not there. Only 10% of the IIT lot are just women. 90% of are men, and therefore in the introduction itself she says why she's not taking women's interviews. So there is no statistical data, but I think Srivatsan, you shared one review on this book, and that review mentions few numbers, okay, and one of which basically says, but just to answer, go back to Manohar, if from 1960s onwards, from 61 onwards when the JEE started coming into picture as an entrance exam, so the 1960s generation says that they had no caste consciousness, which basically speaks for the absence of the lower castes in the IITs totally. And even in the 90s, from 1973 onwards, SC/ST reservation was implemented, but the negligible presence of the SC/STs on the campuses also speaks about their the quota being not fulfilled. Are they being? She doesn't talk about dropouts also. That's another point. She doesn't talk about dropouts at all, which is a very important parameter to judge the IIT's admission on, and because it's not just getting entry into the institution, but sustaining the competition, the stigma, and the discrimination that prevails in the institutional culture. That has to be understood, and that can be understood through dropouts, and that doesn't come through because IIT directors' interviews, etc., speak for the infection that these coached people are bringing into falling of the standards, and then the reserved category people are bringing into the falling of standard. That would definitely have consequences for the SCs and OBCs dropouted, but that doesn't get reflected. So the point is, the data is statistical data is not presented in the book.
There's a question from Mr. Balveer Arora for Professor Mohan Rao. Perhaps you would like to ask the question, or would you want me to ask it?
No, I can ask it. What I was basically wanting to know from Mohan is that most of this research is on the IITs. You mentioned in passing the objection of the Tamil Nadu government because they had a progressive system of reservation in medical colleges, and that helped them provide rural healthcare more easily because that they were more willing to go and work in those areas. Tamil Nadu position is probably exceptional, but overall, what is your impression, having been associated with the medical schools? How does this same phenomena play itself out in that category? Because I think what Mr. Srivatsan, the point that he made on the central character of merit for liberalism and the meritocracy versus aristocracy, there is, apart from the Oxbridge model, there is the question of going further below. I'm referring to Pierre Bourdieu and Passeron's book on the conservative school, that this thing starts much earlier. The cultural transmission and the creation of new elites in republics, because the principle of equality in republics is proclaimed, but there are mechanisms that are at work which thwart that principle. So Mohan, I am wanting to relate it specifically to the medical profession. I would like to understand how this plays itself out.
Tamil Nadu, in its NEET, provides a greater proportion of reservations than is authorized by the NEET. And so this is the point that is being contested in the Supreme Court. Now, as far as medical schools are concerned, it is not so much the NEET the recommendations on reservations apply only partially to private institutions, private medical colleges. They apply fully only to the government institutions. Today, private institutions far outnumber government medical colleges. So what you're seeing now is a recasting of the demographics, so that medical education is becoming increasingly more privileged and therefore upper caste. I've forgotten the exact details, but I think private to government medical colleges is in the ratio of 2:1. And private colleges have reservations for SC, STs and do not have for OBCs.
But these private colleges, one hears about huge capitation fees. So where does the capital required to enter these colleges, isn't it substantial?
It is shocking. It is truly shocking. 60 lakhs is what is asked for. And with 60 lakhs, I think you can get an MBBS and an MD. 2 crores promises an MBBS, an MD, and a Master of Chirurgy degree.
Wow.
So that's the merit that we are talking about, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what thank you, Mohan.
Yeah.
Can I?
Please.
May I, make some 2-3 observations quickly?
Yeah.
See, I am retired from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Professor Nandini Manjrekar, I am her colleague. We were in the same school. My, specialization has been, our interest has been on the education of the scheduled caste, higher education in particular. Talking of IIT and the reservation in the early 70s, they implemented the policy as against the TISS implemented, this is for your information, reservation policy in the faculty, for the faculty in 1980. And I was the first to get into through the quota at the institute as a faculty. Number 2, during my service, I tried to get into the IIT
students belonging to the reserve category and do some study. Surprisingly, I was bluntly refused to give any data or allowed to contact the students also. Now, my friends and some faculty colleagues from the IITs, tell me that the students, fellow students, upper caste, and the faculty at the IIT and the administration at the IIT, how they treat these category students is a long-awaited empirical evidences to be established. This is my first, this thing, because one, we are talking up to getting into the quota as against the merit. But what happens after that? And during the studies, what their problems are, social, psychological, phenology, academic, no one knows. Now, how do these so-called merit students conceive and treat the other students, that is category students, is another issue that needs to be empirically formed. Now, third and the last point I wish to make is this, that the points made by Professor Rao, I take it very quickly further, that based on my maybe 3-4 decades experiences, tell me this, that the gap that has been existing between even the progressive so-called academicians, intellectuals, or the activists belonging to the upper caste, particularly the Brahmin community. I'm not personally against any community. And the so-called Dalit and the tribal elites educated, the gap that is existing is, now the trend has been that the majority works on the Dalits and tribals are by upper caste. And there is a gap and there is a vacuum of the studies or the outcome that expected to be from within. Now, this filling up this gap with the joint support of all that, whatever, upper and the lower, is thoroughly missing out. Now, the point is I'm trying to make is this, that the IITs are not exception. Medical education, for example, or the management, MBA, all the professional institutions offering professional education, what is happening is, I will read this book particularly and then comment on the book. I'm not saying about anything about the book, but the point is that I really feel the gap between, let me say, they and we, he and I, how to, how to come together and go together and fight it out. That is the issue. Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you. We can't hear you. Professor Sivas.
If I might respond to Dr. Vankede.
Yeah.
Please.
There is a website called Dalit Camera. And you might be interested because they're collecting the experiences of Dalit students, the kind of discrimination they faced. It started off first with medical education, but now they have generalized it and they're collecting lots of this data, these interviews, videos, etc., that you might like to see.
Okay, sure.
Dalit Camera.
Dalit Camera.
Radhika Desai's question is, the recent caste discrimination case in Silicon Valley, is it the beginning or the recognition/questioning of aristocratic caste bias with merit in the meritocratic workplace of the US? with regard to IITians there. Would somebody like to respond to this question about what is happening in the US? Anybody? I mean, it need not only be the speakers, but speakers also are welcome. Unmute Radhika Desai. I am not able to unmute Radhika Desai's. Unfortunately, I'm not able to unmute Radhika Desai, but anybody else can respond. If she writes the question, I can easily read it out further. But basically, she's talking about the, I know, yeah.
Srivatsan, every one of us can unmute ourselves if we want. There is an option.
Okay. How do you do that? Do you want me to do something?
Just at the left side bottom corner, there is an icon for muting and unmuting.
Right. Go ahead then. Yeah, please. But I think, yeah, you managed to unmute it.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear.
Yeah, no, I could. I was in another room where others were around, so I wasn't unmuting myself on purpose. Yeah, I see the point. What I wanted to check is, we don't have an anti-discrimination law, right? Clearly, like the US and the workplace. So in the context of that, I understand the point that caste has become an issue in US, and there are, Mohan's, I think I'll go to that site as is mentioned. But in the face of this coming up in the workplace quite starkly now, and the laws in the US being stringent and processes, how do we think it will play out, and its implications for that branding that Murali was talking about?
Yeah. Sir, do you want to respond or shall I? Actually, you have to unmute.
Am I muted?
Yeah, no,
yes.
Audible now, yeah.
Okay. Caste does not fit into the parameters of discrimination in the USA. There are efforts to include it in some places. As of now, only one university, the University of Brandeis, recognizes caste discrimination. There's no other workplace that recognizes that in the United States of America.
Yeah, I think I may add another point to that. I mean, this was also, I think in US, California. If I remember right, I think Jangam Chinnaya wrote about it, that US, they were trying to include caste in the school textbooks, but the predominant Hindu diaspora in US objected to that, and they stalled that process of inclusion of caste in the school syllabus as a recognition of the caste implications of caste for the Dalits to come in. So therefore, to recognize what kind of a social discrimination that is happening in India, and to include that caste as a parameter for social discrimination and stigmatization, there was an attempt to include caste in the US textbooks, especially in the California. But I think that was objected to and then prevented by the powerful Indian diaspora there, who are upper caste. So therefore, that is one. And I'm not aware of the recent case that you have referred as a case against caste discrimination in the workplace in US. But yes, when we talk about Indian institutions of higher education, I think the Prevention of Caste Atrocity Act, which also has a clause on discrimination and prevention of discrimination, that alone can be, I think, invoked. I don't. But in the Rohit Vemula's protest in the aftermath of Rohit Vemla's what they call institutional murder, the Rohit Vemla Act was supposed to do this job of recognizing caste discrimination among the students on the campuses. But I don't think that is pressed into law, and then we don't have a protective mechanism for preventing discrimination, which can also talk about dropouts, why students are dropping out. So dropout can be an example to say that it is because of the discrimination and stigmatization that is happening. But I don't know if in university we have anything to talk about protecting or preventing caste discrimination on the campuses, as recognizing institutions of university education as workplaces for students. I mean,
would I add one small point to this? Is actually quite a see the dominance of the upper caste in Western universities. If you look at the social sciences, for instance, it is also based on the dominance or the hegemony of upper caste history of ancient India, the way in which it is being put up and the manner in which scholarship has come around it. So the dominant scholars actually belong to those fields. For example, one kind of person like that would be Velcher Narayan Rao, who's talking about the dominant forms of Telugu literature and the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the story written by Tikkana, the rewriting by Tikkana and all that. So there have been moves to actually transform that infrastructure of academic discourse, which also change the power structure of the academics are working with. Because automatically, if you come from a dominant strand of discourse which looks at ancient India, you also have a louder voice in the kinds of hiring and everything which is happening. So there's been K. Satyanarayana and the other scholar, I forget his name, 2-3 people have been working on this to actually rebuild, to construct different kind of discourse about literature, about the history of literature in India, etc., etc. That's a part of the interwoven effort, because the domination is not purely a question of administrative politics. It's also a question of having a cultural hegemonic domination of the whole sphere. And that, I think, is something which has a long history. It's got a different discussion behind it. Radhika, you want to say something more?
No, I don't want to say anything more. I think there is a case. I just want to point out to Mohan that there is a case because caste was not allowed. They have filed it under religious discrimination and calling it a sect. That's what California has recently done, and he's right. Earlier, it's almost impossible otherwise.
I was wondering if Professor Vankade would like to elaborate a little bit on what he said about, his own view on the experiences of students who get in as quota students, and therefore how the discourse is not enough just to talk about merit in terms of entry, but even further in terms of survival. You'll have to unmute yourself if you're speaking, or... No. No, I think I'm not able to unmute him. Uma, would you like to go ahead and speak? Unmute yourself and speak, please.
Thank you to both the speakers for the excellent presentations. I haven't read the book, but both presentations have given a very vivid, and detailed picture of the arguments in the book. So thank you for that. I was following the discussion happening. I was two things. One, I just wanted to point out that some time ago there was a study of the number of suicides of mostly Dalit students in IITs. I forget the name of the person. Anup, somebody had put together.
Death of Merit.
Yeah, a report. Yes. So, and then the other thing I was thinking of. Oh, let me just put my video on also, so I can. Yeah. Hi. The other thing I was thinking of was there was in IIT Chennai, I think there was a study group formed, and then the administration had sort of put a ban on it. There was a whole discussion around that. I was wondering whether any of that figured in this book, and so following from that, I was thinking that with the growth of, I think, although they may be few in number, some of the humanities students in the IITs and some of the students coming from SC/ST backgrounds, there seems to be some discussion in general. But I think, like Murali said, maybe there's not enough of interviews, maybe from of those students in the book, which may also be one reason if that doesn't come through strongly. So it seems to me that there is so much more work that needs to be done, especially in Andhra and Telangana. The whole MSET IIT mania, in some ways it may have made ensured that students from different communities get into that system. But then what has been the general effect on other disciplines and in general on education itself is a question that we need to think about. I don't know if these too many random things that I've said, but just some thoughts following from the discussion.
Yeah, Uma, if I may respond to you, in the book, there are instances where these experiences of Dalit students and OBC students on campuses comes up for discussion. Especially what the author does is that she picks up the discussions that happened on the Twitter and Facebook. Okay, so there the students are writing, the students from the quota, so-called. They are writing about their experiences there. So there is an elaborate, the copy is kind of reference to that along the entire chart is reproduced, and then she commented on that. That is one, which is on actually page numbers 243, 244, 245. And then yes, about Ambedkar Periyar study circle. Yes, there is some reference to that too. And then Dalit experience, there is a small section in the chapter on contesting reservation. There is a small section on Dalit experiences. If I can read out just one paragraph, just to throw light on. So I'll just read out from page number 253. This is an account of Satish. So now Satish says that I felt like an intruder at IIT, but it was less about an internalized sense of inadequacy than about the culture of the institution, where, it's quoted, most people were upper caste but knew nothing about caste. Now this is striking. Most people were upper caste but knew nothing about caste. Unlike more activist students, now author is saying, unlike more activist students, Satish chose to keep to himself as a way of avoiding uncomfortable situations. And quote, if you look at Rohit Vemla or Kanaya, he elaborated, they are trying to basically force, not exactly force, but claim their identity and basically go outright and say that this is me. And I think that whatever is happening is not good. I never did that. I kept to myself, avoided confrontations. If somebody said something, I would just listen to it and not respond. I think that became part of my personality. Now, this is a quotation of Satish, and this has reference to Rohit Vemla and Kanaya. Then that kind of a sense of insecurity that they feel on the campus, that on the face of this backlash against the reservation and the quota and the stigmatization that is happening, the students are not able to put up any sort of a fight or confrontation of them politically, in the debates also, because there is no recognition and appreciation of the presence of the social sciences and humanities as a branch of knowledge in IITs, because that is totally sidelined. And most of the commonsensical understanding of the parents and the social milieu is that they think, they in fact wonder why social sciences and humanities exist in IITs, because there's no place for it. So that actually undercuts the relevance and importance of speaking about the sociology of caste and the politics of caste and discrimination on campuses, which leads to people like Satish's experience of kind of not invisibilizing and not speaking up and not asserting. So this non-assertion is something that has to be understood as some sort of active silencing of the quota people as people who are undeserving and came, and therefore any invocation of the politics will be seen as an extension of that undeservedness being justified in the name of legal system. So therefore, the kind of a merit question they're unable to really challenge. But a lot of humiliation is happening around that. And therefore, the social media accounts, if you read that, and then there are more details about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Professor Mohan Rao, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay. I was reminded of the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. An associate professor there, if I'm not mistaken, his name is Deepak Baghel. He published a paper with his student on caste composition of the faculty at the Indian Institutes of Management all over India. And it was shocking, the representation of, it was so predominantly upper caste. I've forgotten the figures, but it's worth looking at. The response to that was also very interesting. He got a show cause notice from the director of IIM Bangalore for publishing a paper in EPW.
Wow. Just a small point about what Murali read out, the upper caste students being unaware of caste. I think one thing is, like Satish Deshpande has remarked, castelessness is a luxury that only upper caste students can claim. But on the other hand, as a corollary to that, they're very much aware of what they feel is they are being deprived of because of reservations. Or, they feel that there would be more of them if not for the reservation. So they, in a sense, they are blind to their own caste privilege, but hyper aware of what they feel is the way they're being deprived. So in a way, they are completely blind to their own privilege and to the composition of Indian society and its demography, like the number of people from different castes and how they are so ill represented in our higher education institutions. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
These numbers about faculty, etc., I think they are there in this review that was published in EPW by Srivatsan, what you shared, I think is Harish.
I shared it to everybody in the chat.
Yes, yeah, those details are there in that. Yeah. But I would also just want to comment that when this students say, the upper caste students say that we don't really think caste exists in India, except in the quotas, or the students who are coming from quotas, recognition of caste, that kind of a denial is also kind of coming from both acute awareness of caste as a social reality, and at the same time illegitimizing the use of caste as a parameter for the social mobility of the downtrodden. So it is, I think, they're carefully using this argument about it. Doesn't mean that they are not aware of caste, they are not aware of caste in terms of the academic debates and socio-political understanding of the caste system, because that is totally missing in the IIT campuses. Therefore, they are not aware. But in terms of their own caste subjectivities, as in, the cross thread being worn, and then different kinds of rituals and the festivals that they are celebrating on the campuses, all this is acute awareness of their casteness, isn't it? So, yeah, but caste as a political category, they are ours too.
No, I think also, Murali, what you were talking about, the importance of representation vis-a-vis the liberal notion of merit. What the liberal notion of merit does is it transforms all questions of representation into absolute individuals who are meritorious or not meritorious vis-a-vis the state, in which formation the upper caste has an absolute advantage. Yeah. Whereas if one wants to talk of a representative notion of republicanism, where you have groups who represent different forms or different social forms, different communities, then the whole question of merit itself would get transformed.
Right.
That is
yeah, absolutely. But I think that discussion on that and to critically engage with these notions of equality and republicanism, and then the significance of individual over the group identity. I think that has to be in the Indian context. I think it has to be discussed at length from the critical perspectives about what it does to the low caste disprivileged groups when we are overemphasizing the individual or individualism in a social democracy context. Because this racial, what you said, Srivatsan, about the racialization of caste, there is some discussion in the book, and you also critically reflected on that.
Yeah.
The drawing on the Max Muller's work of the Aryan race, and then the claims to the naturalization of whiteness for the Brahmins in the US. So that's actually pivoted to that. I connected to that idea. But when it comes to the Indian now, what Ms. Radhika Desai referred as caste as a religious sect is being referred. It is again going to pitch the discussion around the religious sentiments and the religious sects within, right? So again, a reflection of religious group or a religious identity as more, regional and caste-specific histories, which must definitely take into account the idea of a religion and a religious sect and etc., is basically a kind of a spin that the Brahmins are also using. Right? When they say that caste should not come into US, basically they are saying, using the idea of religious sentiment, that their minority, the Hindu minority, religious sentiments in US are being, hurt. And again, to take the religious sect as another, a category within to claim caste is again to take it back to the preempt or, to vacate Ambedkarite and anti-caste questions of democratization and the representation, right? So how can we actually engage with religion as a sect, as a democratic category for representation? I hope I was able to make that point. Yeah.
I have a question for Sunita and others who are putting up all these readings here. Is it possible to send us all these on a email or something so that we can, how do we access this once we are outside, if we go off Zoom?
We can send the
very important things you're sending us here.
We don't have everybody's email IDs, but whoever, our email list is there, and to you we can send. We can simply copy this and send it to you.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Yeah.
Is there anybody else who would like to add to the discussion?
I would just like to say something regarding representation in faculty. In a place like Delhi University or Jawaharlal Nehru University, where you have reservations for in the faculty, you advertise a post for a certain kind of reserved category. And if you are unable to fill that post for whatever reason, not getting enough candidates, not getting good enough candidates, etc., the post remains unfilled and has to be re-advertised. Whereas what you have is very different in IITs. It's part of the exceptionalism of IITs, in that if a post is a reserved post, it is advertised once and does not get filled. And if this happens 3 times, it can be converted into a general category post. So this is a tactic, I would say, that is being used by upper caste faculty to repeatedly not fill their reserved quotas in the faculty.
I would suggest that all the IITs and the universities, public universities and the colleges, it's mandatory to have the office of the liaison officer, SCST. I was liaison officer for more than 20 years at the institute here. Based on my experiences, I would tell you the licensing office is not functioning properly under the pressure. And who heads that office is also very important, because it is not necessary to have the licensing officer from these communities. He could be or she could be anybody from any but the senior position. But the problem here is IIT liaison officer in IIT or the TISS or all the management institutions, they do not work properly and honestly. All the provisions in support of the SCST, academic support, social support, financial support, special coaching, training classes, everything is there. But what is happening is the liaison officer is always pressurized not to implement, or he himself is insensitive enough, unaware enough not to do this. De-reserving post is banned officially. IITs are funded by the government of India. Then anyone can question this. De-reservation is, when I applied at the TISS, there were 16 SCST positions. That time the de-reservation did not exist. 2 were selected, 1 SC and 1 ST. 14 were thrown open, de-reserved. Now the question is not only the issue of reserve post and fulfilling that. There are many other issues which are strongly in support of the SCST candidates, faculty and the admin staff for their development, academic, social and the other benefits which are not properly implemented. Now the question is that I was literally refused, rather rudely refused not to give any data, even by the liaison officer of the IIT Bombay. Now the question is, it's a public institution. Everything is open and should expect it to be open. But there is no pressure, there is no demand, there is no activism with reference to implementation of whatever is available, awareness, motivation, so many other things, the remedial coaching, English language, all those. Now the question is, we need to cross the line of reservations and implementation up to the admission level. What happens post-admission? What happens after they complete? What happens during their studies, in the hostels, in the classroom? All these issues are supposed to be taken up by the liaison officer of each of the institution and the college, which is not happening. Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Rao, I am proud to be a product of JNU. I took my MPhil and PhD from JNU. What is happening in DU? All the activism and politics there in DU. What happens in DU? What happens in other universities? It's gross, basically gross immunity or insensitiveness. I'm not accusing any individual person or any individual institution, but based on my experiences, I'm telling you, you know, there is no role model. There is no role model institute in the country. TIS has done many good things also, but I had to pay myself for many things, you know, asserting, fighting, and questioning. But the question is this: that the training the trainers, why can't Murali organize some training or sensitizing orientation programs for those who are activists, those who are academicians, those who are in administration? Gross, I'm sorry, I'm not teaching or telling something, but I'm telling you, sharing with you all this out of my, so many years experiences and the discomfort I had undergone through. Now I left the things. Now pre-admission orientation, like the coaching you have for the IIT. Government of India has the scheme, pre-admission orientation for IIT, engineering, medical, IAS, IPS. There are many other. Now no one talks of this. Where is the money gone, the provision? For IIT admissions, engineering admissions, there are provisions. There is a budget provided by the government. Now let me tell you, today 222 crore rupees are due to the government against the post-matric scholarship for the SC/ST across the country. 222 crore. This is a primary authentic information. No one questions that. Many students I have survived educationally because of the scholarship only. Now the question is, the facilities that are existing are slowly withdrawn. No one questions. Now hostel schemes, girls hostel schemes, tribal hostel scheme, SC hostel scheme, where is the money going? Where is the implementation? Why not the implementation? Why people don't talk there in the parliament also? This 222 crore rupees. Now, my question is, yes, IIT's, debate on IIT is very important, medical, very important, but this is not the only, issue in isolation. My urge, my request is this, that, all of us attending this session, when do we meet again and over what? Is it ending with the academic discourse only or something else? I want to know. Now, that potentials one has, the knowledge and the experience one has is going unutilized, is not channelized, it is not utilized. Now the question is that I was talking of the gap between you and me. Not the individual level gap, but the social, academic, intellectual gap that needs to be filled up. Sorry, I'm talking so much. I stop here. Thank you.
No.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Quick comment on that,
Yeah.
Srivatsan?
Yeah, please.
Can I? Yeah, okay. No, since you talked about IITs and then the pre-admission orientation that we do in TISS, and then the budget for that, I don't really know. There is something called a preparatory program, which is kind of a 0 year for the quota students if they didn't really perform on par in JEE. So their 0 year is basically spent in they being equipped for academic rigor of the IITs even after JEE. Now that's where I think Death of Merit, Anup Kumar's documentary talks about the suicides and all. And there is also reference to that in the book, Ajantha Subramanian's book, about how that is actually displaying or announcing the identity of the Dalit students who otherwise would want it to be anonymous. So for this particular program, is there a legal sanction for that? And
yes,
one,
yes.
Or is it just an IIT's prerogative to bring in that? And then is there a funding allocated for that to train the students? And on what basis is it allowed if it is reproducing stigma? That is one question. And another question is about, you're talking about implementation throughout the university experience as some sort of a protective mechanism, as scaffolding for the students coming from the quota. I don't think that any university in India has thought about it or has institutionalized any mechanism like that, because I especially don't think this remedial coaching, what they call, as per the UGC, which is part of the mandate of the SCST OCEL guidelines, remedial coaching is actually not a kind of a positive, policy or a provision. It is overburdening the students to learn English, which is not really aligned to the academic programs that they are pursuing. It's that grammar, and then the proficiency, communicative English method that is followed there is totally divorced from any academic content in it, and therefore it becomes a double burden on the students. Rather, there must be a careful, more advanced development of the English language courses, drawing from the academic program that the student is enrolled for, which is kind of a complementary, and not call it this remedial coaching, but you make it part of the whole institution, which is what I have done in TIS Hyderabad. Now everybody in TIS Hyderabad have to take something called English Foundation course in the very first semester.
Yes.
So that, yeah, that is linked, and the material for the course structure and then the course instruction is drawn from the students' own primary programs in which they are enrolled, and therefore the articles and then the conceptual categories of language improvement, etc., is plugged to the programs of the primary affiliation of the student, which is in a way enabling the student to get advanced knowledge about the subject, their own subject, through English language, which is kind of a progressive step rather than kind of a stigmatization. That's what I just want to say. Yeah.
I will respond very quickly. Murali, I think we met once or twice in Hyderabad at the institute. Yeah. I remember now. See, basic reference, very important, is the Swami's book. Swami brings out annually the guidelines for ACA implementation for reservation policy and various schemes every year. And second is the Mr. P.S. Krishnan, the retired IAS officer. He passed away recently. All this. And third is the UGC, you can skip always. It is the website now of the Parliament. The Parliament and the Government of India also has got the SCST cell, Home Ministry, under the wings of the Home Ministry. The IAS officer is the liaison officer of the SCST cell in the ministry. There are ways out. I have experimented this at the TIS campus also very successfully. First semester, yes, but I have organized orientation and sensitization for faculty also.
So we have also done that, and it's not just a foundation course in the first semester. We have built it throughout 2 years of program for MA.
So and my ultimate opinion is that what is made available across the country, not even 40% is being utilized. That's my contention. That's my opinion.
Thanks. I think I'll ask for funding for English Language Center now.
You can contact me. I will definitely be happy to whatever The only thing is this, that how to extend this to the other institutions. IIT entrance 1 year, the SHT students are given the time to pick up. During that 1 year, what do they do for the students? Is to examine.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Murali, do you have anything further to say?
No, I think I just responded to most. Unless you have something, Srivatsan?
No. Thanks.
Yeah.
Mohan, do you have anything further to say? We'll just wind up otherwise.
I think we can wind up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this and participating in this discussion, this rich discussion. And I thank the speakers and the participants for the insight they brought into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.